The senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, I rise today to ask my colleagues to honor the life of Trickett Wendler. Pictured here, a young mother of 3 who fought and lost her battle with ALS disease, and the lives of so many others who want a right to try and save their lives by passing the Trickett Wendler Right to Try Act of 2016. Now, like so many of my colleagues, we are often visited by our constituents, people who are battling their own diseases, whether it's ALS or Duchenne muscular dystrophy or different forms of cancer. This is a very simple bill. What it's trying to do is very simple. It's trying to restore freedom. It's trying to give patients and their family hope. The freedom and hope that is being denied them right now by a federal bureaucracy. This is a bill about people. And certainly from my own standpoint, I think all of us recognize ALS initially in its original name, Lou Gehrig's disease. I certainly understood a little bit more about ALS when I heard about Tom Watson's caddy. And then in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, a family member of our Lourdes High School family was stricken with ALS, Doug Pesorski. He courageously battled the disease and lost his fight with it as well. I met Trickett Wendler on May 23rd of 2014 when she came to Washington, D.C. with a group of other advocates for ALS cures. And simply talking about my meeting with Goldwater Institute and the bill they were promoting through the states, Right to Try, and indicating to her my support for it, tears began streaming down her cheeks. She wanted that hope. But along this path, as I've advocated for the Right to Try bill, I've met other individuals. People like Matt Bellina, a former Navy pilot who testified before our committee just yesterday. He's a father of 2 with his wife expecting his 3rd trial. He's also fighting ALS. He wants hope. During our press conference, when I introduced this piece of legislation, a man from Pennsylvania, Frank Mangiello, asked to say a few words. Already pretty far advanced in ALS, where it's difficult to understand Frank, but he quoted Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln said, "If you get shot, you die once. If you dread, you die over and over again." And he made the point, not having access to some of these treatments for ALS is like dying over and over again. He wants some hope to be able to stay alive for his wife and 6 children. This bill isn't only about ALS, though. It's about other incurable diseases. It's about other terminal patients who have no further treatment options. Little boys like Jordan McLean, who also testified before our committee with his mother, Laura, a volunteer firefighter suffering from Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a disease that also is terminal. And this disease in particular indicates the problem we have with the FDA. More than 50 patients and advocates for an effective treatment, something that's being proven to be effective to extend the muscle function of these little boys. FDA had an advisory committee meeting, listened to testimony of over 50 Americans begging the FDA to allow and approve that treatment. The FDA advisory committee voted 7-3 and said, no, we're not going to give you that right. We're not going to give you that hope. Now, fortunately, and I was overjoyed a couple Mondays ago when the FDA overruled that advisory committee and actually approved those drugs and provided some hope. If you want to understand how broken the process is, let me just give you a couple metrics. In the decade of the 90s, it took about 10 years from discovery to approval of a new drug. Today, that time period stands about 14 years. In today's dollars, in 2004, it cost about $1 billion for a successful drug to go through that approval process. Today, it costs about $2.6 billion to have a drug approved. That indicates there's something wrong with the system. The Right to Try bill addresses what is wrong. It's not a panacea, but it's a good first step. The last person I want to talk about is someone I consider a hero, someone I consider is a whistleblower, a courageous oncologist from Houston, Texas. His name is Dr. Ibrahim Del Passant. Dr. Del Passant was part of a clinical trial treating neuroendocrine cancer with a therapeutic agent called Lu-177 octreotide. He was, in his opinion, successfully treating these cancer patients. He was extending their lives, but he butted up against a limit in terms of a clinical trial of 150 patients. And so he requested from the FDA to expand that to include another 78 of his patients that were terminal, that were dying from this aggressive form of cancer. The FDA said no. Now, fortunately for Dr. Del Passant and those 78 patients, Texas had passed a right to try bill. The problem is the FDA has not weighed in. We don't know whether the FDA will challenge these right to try bills. I could not get an answer from the FDA bureaucrats as to whether or not they're going to challenge that. So Dr. Del Passant took it upon himself and on behalf of his patients courageously began treating those additional 78 patients, and they are alive today because of his courage. No help from the FDA. Mr. President, 32 states now have enacted their own individual right to try piece of legislation. In those states, 4,186 legislators, both Democrat and Republican, have voted on those bills. Only 108 have voted no. 4,078 legislators, 97.4% of legislators in 32 states have voted yes to right to try. There's nothing partisan about this. This is a completely bipartisan effort, again, trying to restore freedom, trying to restore hope. The latest state was California. Governor Brown just signed that bill into law. And we had in front of our committee last week, State Assembly Majority Leader Ian Calderon, a Democrat, I might add, was the sponsor of that right to try bill. So, Mr. President, all I'm asking, we have 42 co-sponsors of this bill in the United States Senate. I've asked my other colleagues to join us as co-sponsors, and I realize some of them don't want to go that far. All I am asking is that no senator stand up and object to providing a little bit of freedom, a little bit of hope to patients who simply have no other avenue. Now, to be respectful of people's time, let me move to my request, and I see Senator Barrasso here is here. He'd also like to speak to this bill. I'd like to give him that opportunity, but Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Help be discharged from further consideration of S-2912 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed. The motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, I reserve my right to object.
The Democratic leader.
Mr. President, I understand the seriousness of my friend's proposal. I understand the urgency that patients and their families feel when they're desperate for new treatments. I could go through a litany of people that have been in predicaments like this young lady here that we see the picture. I remember Wendy Rockefeller. I went to see her in Boulder City. She was all dressed up, knowing that I was coming, in bed. She, at a very young age, was stricken with Lou Gehrig disease. And she died 5 days after I saw her. She loved politics. She was involved in my campaigns. But this dread disease took her. Her husband was desperate. He took her to Mexico for some treatment that didn't work, of course. But as my friend from Wisconsin said, he was looking for hope. Her husband, Uwe Rockenfeller. Bob Forbes was a young school teacher in Las Vegas, but he had a great knack for business. Without going into a lot of detail, he worked part-time, working for an ambulance company. But he wound up owning that big ambulance company. Very successful, made a lot of money. But he was stricken with Lou Gehrig disease. And he died, not as fast as Wendy, but he died. I went to see him a day before I saw Wendy. So, Mr. President, I understand the urgency of the patients, but also we have a situation here that there are ways to improve the access process so that it works better and faster for patients. My friend talks about 40 or 42 co-sponsors. Basically, virtually every one of the Republicans are co-sponsors, but not Democrats. Why? Because, first of all, we've asked that there be a hearing on this bill. Nope, don't have time for a hearing. So it hasn't been through the committee processes we were promised we would have with the outstanding issues dealing with this policy. There are major players in this that simply have not had an opportunity to tell us what's wrong with the bill. They've told me personally. So, Mr. President, I believe that we should do what we need to do here to have a good, responsible piece of legislation. And I also want everyone to understand that it's really difficult to comprehend when we have had 7 weeks. We just finished a little break here. We're going to take 10 more weeks. Why we haven't had time to do a hearing on something like this? I think we should have had a hearing on Merrick Garland. Why haven't we had a hearing on Merrick Garland? Well, the reason that my Republican friends have not had a hearing on Merrick Garland is they know if they did a hearing on Merrick Garland, people would see who he is. And having seen that and listened to this man, they would be hard-pressed to vote against him. That's why they're not doing a hearing. So for all these reasons, that we haven't had a vote on Merrick Garland, we've had absolutely no workout on this process. As desperate as the situation is, and I understand it, I object.
Mr. President.
The objection is heard. Senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, it is beyond disappointing that the minority leader would refer to this as potentially a partisan bill. Let me just, again, reiterate. In 32 states, where 4,186 state legislators have voted on this, 4,078 have voted yes, Republican and Democrat alike, 97.4%. This is a bipartisan effort. It provides freedom, it provides hope, and it's just beyond disappointing that the minority leader would object. I would like to ask Senator Barrasso, or my senator from Wyoming, who's been a real leader on the issue, for example, with the Duchenne muscular dystrophy. What have you heard from patients, from your constituents, in terms of the hope that this bill would provide them?
Well, Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, people ask for hope. They want hope. They need hope. As a young doctor in my training and worked at a children's hospital, a muscle disease clinic. And what I saw were families, because of muscular dystrophy, specifically Duchenne's, runs in families coming to a clinic. And you knew that the day you were seeing that young person, it was going to be the best day that person ever had, because this is a progressive disease. And they're looking for hope, and they look to you as a physician for hope. They look to the researchers for hope. And that's what this right to try legislation does. It provides hope. And I believe it goes further than that. It's not just hope, it's also help. Because the research we've seen with this drug for muscular dystrophy, for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and you talk to the parents and you talk to the patients, and I've met with the parents and met with the patients, what they're seeing is that that day in the clinic is not that person's best day, with declining after that. They've actually seen a reversal, which is miraculous. And I'm talking about working in a muscle disease clinic when I was in my 20s. We're talking a long time, my entire professional career, working with people with muscle disease. And this is the first thing that I have seen that's actually reversed that declining trend that we see for young people with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, where they go from being able to walk to then walking more slowly to then graduating to a wheelchair. So what we're asking for is hope, when we know that there is actually hope available that may provide help. So the state of Wyoming passed the right to try law. The Attorney General of the state of Wyoming is with us today. He knows about this. He knows that it was bipartisan. Bipartisan. There was nothing partisan about this, I would say to my colleague from Wisconsin. It was bipartisan, overwhelming support in the Wyoming legislature, signed by our governor. And yet we see the Senate Minority Leader come to the floor and object to a vote, which something I would know would pass. Incredible. And he did it because of something related to his reasoning was something about a nominee of the president to be on the Supreme Court. Mr. President, we're talking about people that are dying today. And the woman that this legislation is named after, with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease, people did the bucket challenge, the ice bucket challenge. To see Bill Gates having somebody pour a bucket of cold ice water over his head in an effort to try to help someone with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. The minority leader came and named a couple of people who lost their lives. We all know people that lost their lives. The senator from Alaska had a relative who lost his life to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Every time I go to mail a letter at the post office in Casper, Wyoming, and drive down Randy Maxwell Boulevard, it's named by a postal worker who lost his life to amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He would have loved the right to try. So I come to the floor in support of my colleague, in support of the legislation, and I'm just so sorry and sad to see the minority leader, the senator from Nevada, stand up and object to an opportunity to give the Senate the right to try, to give patients the right to try, at a time when we know there is actually potential cures available, and there are people who are looking for the hope and looking for the help that those potential cures provide. And so I would say to my friend and colleague from Wisconsin, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for bringing to the floor the beautiful face of a patient from your home state who lost her life in a fight, who didn't have a chance to try. Thank you for your leadership on the Duchenne's muscular dystrophy front, and for all people who are suffering around this country, who need hope, who need help, and we know that there is actually help available. So thank you for your caring and your work on this, and I continue to stand with you in your efforts, as do many of the members of the United States Senate and many, many Americans. And I just want to thank you for your continued leadership and your determination. So thank you to the senator from Wisconsin for his incredible efforts, and it's just with profound disappointment in the minority leader to see that he would come to the floor and object to people having a right to try to save their lives. Thank you, Mr. President.
I want to thank the Senator for Wyoming for your leadership on this issue, and I also want to point out how bad I feel and how sad it truly is, because some of those individuals I talked about, some of those patients, some of their families were watching on C-SPAN today. They had their hopes up that the minority leader would not play politics with this issue, would not play politics with their lives. In the last 15 minutes, those hopes have also been dashed. So if you feel terrible about that, I do want to note for the record, in my committee, we've held 2 hearings on this right to try bill. So the minority leader is simply incorrect in saying we've not held hearings. We've fully vetted this piece of legislation. And again, I want to once again point out how bipartisan this has been in the state. 97.4% of state legislators who vote on this have voted in support of it. Now, I notice I have another colleague, the senator from Indiana, who has joined me in a number of instances in writing to the FDA to try and block the logjam on some of these treatments, making them available to people, giving them hope. And I'd like to ask the senator from Indiana, what stories do you have to tell about your constituents who are asking for that freedom, that right to try, that right to hope?
Well, I thank the senator from Wisconsin, a great friend and someone whose passion has been brought to the United States Senate based on issues where people are hurting. I just can't thank him enough for bringing to this body the kind of energy and the kind of passion that is directly related to the pain that people are suffering in his state, whether it's loss of a job, whether it's death of a child, whether it's something related to education, whether it's something related to just everyday life, the things that happen in life. Senator Ron Johnson has been on top of it. And this is a perfect example of that kind of a passion that he is bringing. He refuses to say, I can't go any further. He refuses to take and accept the minority leader's objection to this. Along with my colleague from Wyoming and others, this bipartisan supported measure, how a minority leader can come down here and give an example of why every parent deserves the right to try to save their children, and to take advantage of medicines and procedures that might be that miracle cure, and then say, no, we're not going to take it up. We're not going to give that to you because we know you're in a tight race, essentially what he's saying. We know you're in a tight race in Wisconsin. I want to do anything. Put yourself in the shoes of a parent who is trying to save the precious life of a child and say, how can you put an election in a state that's up for grabs? How can that trump the kind of sorrow and clinging to a last hope that the parents are making? So I just want to commend the senator. I've had the great privilege of serving with him. We were both elected in 2010. We've become friends. His passion, whether it's the national debt, whether it's any number of other issues, but particularly on this, what goes right to the heart and soul of every parent in this country that is doing everything they possibly can to save their child, and to be denied that opportunity because of a political matter just astounds me. So I just commend you, Senator Johnson. I know you will not give up. I know you will fight this to the end. We stand with you. It's not a partisan issue. There's nothing partisan about this issue. And there's no reason why we can't come down here as a body and endorse and pass by unanimous consent what Senator Johnson is asking here. There's no reason whatsoever. So I'm with you to the end. We're all with you to the end. And I think you ought to just keep asking, because I don't believe the senator here can understand why politics should trump something of what you're trying to do.
I also want to thank the senator from Indiana for his support, his leadership on this issue. And I'll just conclude by saying, Mr. President, this is a sad day for the United States Senate. When the minority leader of the Senate would turn his back on terminal patients and their families, deny them that freedom, that right to try, that right to hope, to score a political point. It's a sad day for the United States Senate. I yield the floor.